The first thing I noticed was not that my name had been crossed out of my father's will. It was the color of the ink. My father had died on a cold Tuesday morning in January. The death certificate was signed 2 days later, but the black line drawn through my name was glossy, almost blue under the conference room light, as if the pen had touched the page only recently. I leaned closer without touching it. Beside my crossed-out name, someone had written my brother Daniel's initials. The attorney across the table stopped speaking. Daniel looked at me with the tired, patient expression people use when they want you to believe you are embarrassing yourself. "It's Dad's final decision, Claire," he said quietly. "You need to respect that." But I was not looking at him. I was looking at the page number in the lower corner. Page 7 of 11. The paper was cream-colored, slightly rough, and faintly yellow at the edges. The line through my name was smooth and dark. Too smooth, too dark. It had not aged with the rest of the document. 3 questions entered my mind at once. Why had my father removed me from a will he had discussed with me less than a month before his death? Why had the correction not been witnessed or initialed by him? And why did the ink look newer than the certificate, proving he was already dead? I did not know it yet, but that was the first mistake my brother made. Good day, dear listeners. It's Nora again. I'm glad you're here with me. Please subscribe to my channel and like this video. And also let me know in the comments which city you're listening from. That way I can see how far my stories has traveled. My name is Claire Mercer. I was 46 years old when my father died, and I worked as a forensic billing analyst for a regional hospital network in Columbus, Ohio. That title sounds more dramatic than the job usually was. Most days, I reviewed medical invoices, insurance adjustments, duplicate charges, coding errors, and payment records. I followed numbers through systems until they either made sense or revealed that someone had tried to make them disappear. I had learned something important from years of doing that work. Errors are often messy. Fraud is usually neat. My life before my father's death was ordinary in ways I had once taken for granted. I lived in a small brick house with white shutters and a narrow backyard where I grew tomatoes badly but persistently. I drove a 7-year-old Honda. I packed my lunch most mornings. I had been divorced for 6 years, peacefully enough, and my daughter Emily was finishing graduate school in Pittsburgh. My father, Walter Mercer, lived 40 minutes away in the same house where Daniel and I had grown up. It was a modest 2-story home built in the 1940s, with sloping floors, narrow closets, and a furnace that made a coughing sound every winter. My mother had died 8 years earlier. After that, my father became quieter, but not helpless. He handled his own bills, he still drove. He volunteered twice a week at a veterans food pantry. Every Sunday evening, he called me at 7. Daniel lived in Cincinnati and worked as a commercial real estate consultant. He wore expensive watches, spoke in careful sentences, and always seemed to know someone important. We had never been close. Daniel believed life rewarded confidence. I believed life rewarded accuracy. Our father had spent years trying to keep peace between us. He rarely chose sides, which meant Daniel often got his way simply because he pushed harder. 3 weeks before Dad died, I sat with him at his kitchen table while sleet tapped against the window. He had been recovering from pneumonia and looked thinner than usual. A stack of envelopes sat beside his coffee cup. "You'll have to help Daniel with the house," he told me. I smiled. "Daniel doesn't need help with property." "That's not what I mean." He looked toward the hallway as if someone might be listening. Then he lowered his voice. "I divided things evenly, but the house is complicated." I asked what that meant. He rubbed his thumb along the rim of his mug. "There are records in the study. Old ones. Don't let anybody rush you." At the time, I assumed he meant tax records, insurance policies, perhaps something related to my mother's estate. "What records?" He gave me a tired smile. "You'll know when you see them." That was my father's way. He belonged to a generation that believed important truths should be placed in envelopes and discovered after funerals. I did not press him. I wish I had. Dad died in his sleep 21 days later. Daniel called me at 6 in the morning. His voice was steady. The hospice nurse found him. I sat on the edge of my bed with the phone against my ear, staring at the dark window. Even when death is expected, the room changes when it arrives. For the next several days, everything became paperwork and casseroles. I notified relatives. Daniel contacted the funeral home. Neighbors brought food. People told me my father had lived a good life, which was true, but truth does not reduce grief. It simply gives grief a shape. The first warning sign appeared the evening after the funeral. I drove to Dad's house to collect his medications and secure his documents. Daniel was already there. His black SUV sat in the driveway. The study light was on. When I entered, I found him standing beside Dad's desk with 2 cardboard file boxes at his feet. "What are you doing?" I asked. "Organizing. Before probate." He gave me a small smile. "Claire, it's paperwork, not crown jewels." One drawer stood open. The brass key Dad kept taped beneath the desk was missing. I noticed a gray folder in Daniel's hand. "What's that?" "Insurance." He placed it into the box before I could see the label. I told him Dad had warned me about records in the study. Daniel paused for half a second. Then he laughed softly. "Dad warned everyone about everything near the end." The sentence bothered me, not because it was cruel, but because it was prepared. I asked him to leave the files until we met with the attorney. He agreed too easily. The next morning, both boxes were gone. When I called, Daniel said he had taken them to our father's lawyer, Martin Vale. That name was new to me. Dad had used the same small-town attorney, Rebecca Sloan, for more than 15 years. She had handled my mother's estate and prepared the family trust. Daniel said Dad had changed attorneys 6 months earlier. Why? Estate planning. Why didn't he tell me? You weren't involved. His tone was gentle, almost sympathetic. That was the beginning of the pressure. Not an accusation, not a threat, just the suggestion that I had misunderstood my place in my own family. A week later, Martin Vale's office scheduled the will reading. His office occupied the top floor of a renovated bank building downtown. The lobby smelled of leather and lemon polish. The receptionist knew Daniel by name. That detail went into the mental ledger I had already started keeping. The will looked normal until page 7. Dad left small gifts to the church, the food pantry, and 2 longtime friends. Daniel and I were named co-beneficiaries of his investment accounts and personal property. Then came the house. The original typed paragraph divided ownership equally between us. My name had been crossed out by hand. In the margin were Daniel's initials. Below that, another handwritten sentence transferred all interest in the Mercer residence, its contents, associated accounts, and any attached instruments, to Daniel alone. No witness initials appeared beside the change. No notary stamp, no date. Martin Vale explained that my father had requested the amendment shortly before his death. "Requested it when?" I asked. He adjusted his cuff. "In early January, by telephone, in person. Was anyone else present?" Daniel looked down at the table. Vale said, "Your brother assisted with transportation." I asked to see the original document. "This is the original," he replied. I pointed to the ink. Then I want it examined. The room became very still. Daniel sighed. "Claire." I kept my eyes on the attorney. "My father's death certificate is dated January 12th. This alteration has no date, no witnesses, and no indication that he made it himself." Vale's voice remained calm. "You are grieving. I understand why this is difficult. People often use compassion as a curtain. They pull it between you and the facts." I closed the folder. "I would like a certified copy of every page." Vale refused at first, saying the executor would manage distribution. Daniel had been named executor. I repeated the request. When he still hesitated, I took out my phone and wrote down the time, the names of everyone in the room, and his refusal. That changed his expression. He agreed to provide a copy by the end of the day. I sat in my car afterward for nearly 40 minutes. Rain streaked the windshield. A parking receipt curled on the dashboard. People walked past carrying umbrellas, moving through ordinary afternoons while my family history shifted beneath me. I was not thinking about the value of the house. Dad's home was worth perhaps $300,000. Significant, yes, but not enough to explain the wording, associated accounts, and attached instruments. That phrase sounded drafted. It sounded financial, and it sounded as though the house was connected to something none of us had discussed. Fear is strange. It does not always make you small. Sometimes it makes the room sharper. I drove home and opened a new legal pad. At the top, I wrote 3 words: dates, documents, motive. Then I listed everything I remembered: Dad's warning about the study, the missing file boxes, the new attorney. the handwritten change. The phrase attached instruments. Daniel's initials. I did not call my brother. I did not accuse the lawyer. I did what I had done for years when a hospital invoice did not balance. I preserved the record. The next morning, I contacted Rebecca Sloan, my father's former attorney. She agreed to meet me after I explained that his will might have been altered. Rebecca was in her 60s, with silver hair and a habit of reading every page twice before speaking. She examined the copy without touching the inked sections. "This is not an amendment," she said. "What is it?" "A defacement, unless there is a separate codicil or sworn evidence of intent." She showed me the signature page. Dad had signed the will 18 months earlier in her office. 2 witnesses had signed beneath him. The handwritten changes had been made later. Could Daniel's initials make it valid? No. Could my father have instructed the attorney verbally? Not in a way that overrides the executed will. I felt relief, but Rebecca did not. She turned back to the phrase about associated accounts. "I did not write this language. Do you know what it means?" "Not yet." She advised me to file an immediate objection in probate court and request that the original will be secured by the clerk. Then she asked a question I had not considered. "Did your father own the house outright?" I thought he did. Rebecca searched the county records. The deed showed that Dad had transferred the house into a private trust 4 years earlier. The trustee was not Daniel. It was a company called Greystone Fiduciary Services. The trust itself was not recorded publicly. Rebecca frowned at the screen. "I've heard of Greystone. Is that good?" "It depends on who hired them." Greystone occupied a small office in Dayton and claimed to administer private family assets. Its registered agent was a financial attorney named Simon Rusk, Martin Vale's former law partner. That was the first concrete connection. Rebecca filed the probate objection that afternoon. The judge ordered the original will deposited with the court and prohibited Daniel from selling, transferring, or removing assets from the house. 2 days later, Daniel called me. He sounded hurt. "You hired a lawyer against your own family." "I hired a lawyer to protect Dad's estate." "You're turning a clerical issue into litigation." "A clerical issue doesn't require a new attorney." Missing files and an undated alteration. He was silent. Then his voice softened. "Claire, Dad was worried about you." "In what way?" "He thought you were under financial pressure." I almost laughed. "I had no major debt beyond my mortgage," Daniel continued. "He felt I was better positioned to manage the property. I was going to make sure you were taken care of." There it was. Not ownership, permission, not equality, dependence. He offered me $75,000 if I withdrew the objection. I asked him to send the proposal in writing. He ended the call. 10 minutes later, I emailed Rebecca a summary and saved the call log. The pressure increased quietly. A cousin called and told me Daniel was devastated. A family friend said Dad had always trusted my brother's business judgment. Martin Vale sent a letter warning that litigation could consume the estate. Then someone tried to access my father's online banking account from an IP address connected to Daniel's office. The bank froze the account and contacted the executor. Daniel blamed an assistant. Rebecca requested full financial discovery. That was when the hidden inheritance began to surface. My father had not been wealthy in the way Daniel appeared wealthy. He wore old sweaters and repaired his own appliances. But 43 years earlier, he and 3 co-workers had invested in a small industrial property outside Columbus. The land was later leased to a logistics company. Over time, those lease payments were reinvested through a partnership. Dad's share had grown quietly. The trust linked to his house held not only the property but partnership interests, municipal bonds, and a reserve account containing just over $1.8 million. I sat in Rebecca's office and read the figure twice. Money can make people imagine a different life. All I could think about was Dad eating canned soup because he did not want to waste food. But the records revealed something worse. 6 months before his death, Greystone had prepared documents transferring control of the trust to Daniel. Dad had never signed them. 3 weeks after his death, a signature appeared on a scanned copy. The signature was dated January 9th, 3 days before he died. Rebecca hired a forensic document examiner. The examiner found that the signature had been digitally lifted from an older insurance form. Microscopic defects repeated in exactly the same pattern. A real signature never reproduces every broken line and ink gap identically. The altered will was tested too. The ink crossing out my name contained chemical components from a pen model first distributed months after Dad's death. That was the point of no return. The line through my name had not merely been added late. It had been added after my father was buried. Rebecca amended the complaint to include fraud, conversion, breach of fiduciary duty, and civil conspiracy. The probate judge referred portions of the evidence to the county prosecutor. Daniel came to my house the following Sunday. He stood beneath the porch light wearing a navy coat, his hands empty. I opened the door but did not invite him inside. "You are destroying me," he said. His voice was low, controlled. "No," I replied. "The documents are describing what you did. You don't understand the situation. Then explain it." He looked toward the street. "Val said the trust structure was outdated. Dad wanted me to manage it. We were correcting what he intended. After he died, his jaw tightened. He told me what he wanted. Then why copy his signature?" For the first time, Daniel lost the expression he had worn all his life. The polished patience disappeared. What remained was not rage. It was calculation. He stepped closer. "If this becomes criminal, the entire estate will be frozen. Legal fees will drain everything. Dad's name will be dragged through court. Is that what you want?" "I want the truth preserved. You could take the settlement and end this. I am not selling silence about a forged signature." He studied me for several seconds. "You always thought being careful made you stronger." "No," I said. "Being careful just means I keep copies." I closed the door. The legal battle lasted 11 months. During discovery, Vey claimed he believed Dad had approved the handwritten change. But his office calendar showed no meeting with my father in January. Building security records showed Dad had never entered the office. Vale's billing system contained an invoice created 4 days after Dad's funeral. The description read, "Estate revision consultation. DM Daniel Mercer, not Walter Mercer." At deposition, Rebecca asked Vale why he had represented the alteration as my father's instruction. Vale said he relied on Daniel's account. "Did you verify that account?" "No." "Did you know Walter Mercer was deceased when the ink alteration was made?" Vale requested a break. When he returned, his attorney advised him not to answer. Daniel's deposition was worse. He denied removing records from the study. Rebecca produced a neighbor's doorbell video showing him carrying 2 file boxes to his SUV. He denied knowing Simon Rusk. Bank records showed 3 payments from Daniel's consulting company to Rusk's private firm. He denied offering me money to withdraw. Rebecca displayed a draft settlement found in Vale's email archive, prepared the morning before Daniel called me. Each answer created another contradiction. Fraud is usually neat at the beginning. It becomes messy only when people are forced to explain it under oath. The final collapse came from a small yellow envelope discovered behind a drawer in Dad's desk. The court-appointed estate administrator found it during an inventory. My name was written on the front. Inside was a handwritten note and a copy of the original trust summary. Dad's note was brief. "Claire, if there is confusion, trust the signed records, not anyone's memory. The house and trust are to be divided equally. Daniel has asked more than once for control. I have refused. Please be fair, but do not be pressured." The note was dated 5 weeks before his death. Dad had anticipated conflict. He had not anticipated forgery. At the probate hearing, the courtroom was smaller than I expected. No dramatic speeches, no shouting, just wood benches, fluorescent light, paper files, and a judge who asked precise questions. The forensic examiner testified about the ink and copied signature. Rebecca introduced the security logs, billing records, trust documents, emails, bank transfers, and Dad's note. Daniel's attorney argued that he had been trying to carry out our father's informal wishes. The judge looked at him for a long moment. Informal wishes do not authorize fabricated signatures. The altered language was struck from the will. The attempted trust transfer was declared void. Daniel was removed as executor and ordered to return estate property and pay a substantial portion of the legal costs. Martin Vale surrendered his law license while disciplinary proceedings were pending. Simon Rusk faced separate charges related to fraudulent trust documents. Daniel later pleaded guilty to forgery and attempted theft from an estate. He avoided prison under a negotiated agreement, but received probation, restitution obligations, community service, and a permanent financial fraud conviction. Some relatives said the consequences were too severe. Others said I had done what had to be done. Neither opinion changed the evidence. The trust was eventually divided, according to Dad's original instructions. I received half the house and half the financial assets. Daniel's share was reduced by restitution, legal costs, and funds he had improperly withdrawn. I sold my interest in the house through a court-supervised sale. I did not want to live inside the place where my father's warning had waited in a drawer. With part of the inheritance, I paid off my mortgage and created an education fund for Emily. I donated money to the Veterans Pantry where Dad had volunteered. I also established a small grant through my hospital for patients facing billing disputes after the death of a spouse. I kept my job. People asked why. The answer was simple. I still liked finding what did not belong. 2 years later, I moved into a smaller home near a walking trail. It had a bright kitchen, a quiet street, and enough sunlight in the backyard for tomatoes. That first spring, I planted 6 vines. 4 survived. I considered that progress. Daniel and I did not reconcile in the way they do in movies. There was no tearful embrace, no perfect apology. He wrote me one letter from a court-mandated financial ethics program. He said he had convinced himself that managing the trust was the same as owning it. He said each dishonest step had made the next one easier. I believed that part. I did not answer immediately. Months later, I sent him a short note. I told him I hoped he would build a life that did not require anyone else to become smaller. That was all. For a long time, I thought the story was about a will. Then I thought it was about money. Now I understand it was about pressure. Pressure to stay quiet, pressure to protect appearances, pressure to accept a polite lie because exposing it might make other people uncomfortable. My profession taught me that numbers do not become truthful simply because they are printed on official paper. My father taught me something harder. Love does not require blindness. Forgiveness does not require access. And peace is not the same as surrender. I did not become a different person after the case ended. I became more fully the person I had been all along. Patient, observant, careful, free. The money gave me security, but security was not the greatest thing I inherited. The greatest inheritance was the knowledge that I could trust my own judgment, even when a room full of polished people told me not to. The truth has a weight of its own. You do not always have to carry it loudly. Sometimes you only have to keep the document, write down the date, ask the next question, and refuse to look away. So, tell me, dear listeners, what would you have done if you found your name crossed out of a will and realized the ink was newer than the death certificate? Would you have confronted your family immediately, accepted the settlement, or quietly gathered evidence first? Please share your thoughts in the comments. And if this story stayed with you, subscribe, like the video, and share it with someone who may need the reminder that calm does not mean weak, and careful does not mean afraid.